Good afternoon to the East Coasters and good morning to everybody on the West Coast. I just want to thank you for being a part of our New Earth segment. This is such a great part of the book. And today I have joining me my little 11-year-old Maximilian. He's going to sit in with us and listen to all about the ego, which is awesome. So welcome, Max. And I just want to read to you really quickly text that came in, and I've had many comments from all of you in regards to this book and how helpful it's been, but I just wanted to read out this one. This particular person says, this part of the book and the conversation of the ego have definitely opened up my mind. It's helped me to change my communication with my son and my wife and my entire family. It's helped me with my clients to understand there's no need for complaining or the arguing to make somebody wrong just to make me right. And in there I'd insert just to make my ego right. I don't always talk to people like that, but there are times that I do. And obviously this creates problems for me. I just never knew that it was causing as many problems for me. The ego conversation in this book is so exciting because it seems to be an answer to something I have been looking for. All I want for me in my life is success, freedom, freedom from pain, freedom from confusion, and sense of worth for me, but also for others. Me being an equal amount of an I or an S personality creates a sense of more than I am now. But I do affirm that I'm always the best version of myself. I always love now to be focused on where my ego is at. So it's a matter of having an awareness, right? This is developing an awareness, this book, and it'll forever change your perspective. So here we're going to jump into chapter 3. I'm only a chapter behind. Circle with me. We're starting on page 59, and right away Eckhart starts, well, we're going to jump ahead actually to page 61. So we had set out for a complaining challenge, no complaining challenge for 24 hours, and if you could, to extend it into from 24 to 48 to the week, if you could. And it was interesting watching some of you on Facebook and different places of communication talk about how that went for you. So let's get into the details of what complaining is. I just threw that out there last week. Now I'm just really going to break down what it means to complain for you. I want you to remember, your energy, it's all we are. We come from energy, we go back to energy, and energy has levels to it. When you're up, you're vibrating high, and when you're down, you're vibrating low. And complaining is negativity, so it's vibrating low. And when you're vibrating at that level, you're attracting everything else in your experience at that level. So complaining is just bringing in more of the same. So complaining is one of the ego's favorite strategies for strengthening itself. So it's like going to the gym for the ego. Every complaint is a little story that the mind makes up that you completely have bought into. You now own that story. And really, when you talk to human beings, they are just really compilations of stories that we've identified with, taken on, and now that defines us. So whether you complain aloud or only in your thought makes really no difference. You're still complaining. It still registers on the complaint screen. So egos that perhaps don't have so much else to identify with easily survive just on complaining. So you'll know there's people in the office, there's people in your life, in your family, that's all they do. They complain, complain, complain. And when you're in the grip of this ego complaining mode, complaining about other people, it becomes habitual. And of course, it means you're unconscious. Conscious means we have an awareness of where we are in our experience. Unconscious means we're just in it. We're so much in it that we can't even see that we're in it. And there's no viewpoint. So you don't know that you are doing it, okay? Applying negative mental labels to people, to their face, or behind their back, this is all a pattern. Name calling is probably the crudest form of labeling. And on the scale of unconsciousness, he gives you a little scale breakdown here. When you actually call people names, and he gives examples like jerk, bastard, bitch, all of that, those are definitive pronouncements that you can't argue with. And they are unconscious. And then he gives us the next scale is shouting and screaming. And there's nothing below that. That's just physical violence, right? So you just, as we go into this, just be paying particular attention. Where does this fit into my life? Where does this fit into my relationships? Where does this fit into my communication with others in my life? So resentment, this is the bingo emotion. This is the emotion that goes with complaining. The two and two are part and parcel. And complaining and mental labeling of people adds even more energy to the ego when you add this little drop of resentment, which means you're feeling bitter, you're indignant, you're aggravated, you're offended. We see this in relationships where perhaps one of the people in the relationship is doing more work than the other, and so they start to build this resentment. This is why partnerships are so hard in business, is because often there is going to be different personality types coming together, and there's going to be one component of that group that is going to be more driven or more results oriented, or there might be one that's more social. And so there's no balance of how they approach the work, and therefore one tends to get resentful. And as soon as somebody's resentful, it's like a disease, it's like a cancer. So I always say to people, why are you joining in on a partnership? Is it because you really, really want to collaborate with this person from a place of love, or is it from a place of fear where you're worried that you can't do it by yourself or you have insecurities? So, and I know that's such a thing right now in real estate, is to team up with other people, but really ask yourself that question, because I spend more time breaking people up and making it amicable than working with people that are in partnerships. So, and it's kind of sad, because when you can appreciate the other person's personality, there can be a really incredible dynamic there. And we see that in homes of families, husbands and wives, that resentment starts to build. And as soon as you recognize it, you got to step back and check yourself. You've got to go in and go straight to that feeling and start to work to clear that up. So we will resent other people's greed, their dishonesty, their lack of integrity, what they're doing, what they did in the past, what they may have said about you in the past, or what they failed to do, what they didn't show up for you for, and what they should or should not have done. So the ego loves it. Instead of overlooking unconsciousness in others, you make them into your identity. So he just gave you a tip there. Instead of resenting other people and being stuck in that blame game or complaining about them, what we want to do is learn how to overlook the unconsciousness or see the unconsciousness in other people. And that's called empathy. So who does that? Who has the ability to see in somebody else that unconsciousness, or you know, the awareness in you will start to see, the consciousness in you will see the unconsciousness in others without judgment. But when you're in the blame mode or victim mode, you are raveled up in that unconsciousness. You're sandwiched in on that with the ego. So sometimes the fault that you perceive in another isn't even there. It's a total misinterpretation, because when we're stuck in our ego, we project, and our mind is conditioned to see enemies and to make ourselves feel superior and right. And I know a lot of people, this is their shtick. This is my shtick. I grew up in a family of 11, the baby of 11, and I know I was super defensive. And, you know, my mom said I could have been a defense attorney, because I knew how to defend myself, and I knew how to justify by making my siblings wrong and making me right. And so then it becomes a pattern in our adult life, right? So at other times, the fault may be there for sure. Somebody may be really showing up in a negative way in your life, and everybody could agree with you on that. But by focusing on it, sometimes to the exclusion of everything else, we get obsessed, we just amplify it. And what you react to in another, you just strengthen the ego in yourself, and you get stuck in that perpetual alignment, and then you're lowering your vibration, and then you wonder why your abundance is affected. You wonder why your relationships aren't cohesive. You wonder why. Remember, in the law of attraction, just because I'm being icky over here doesn't mean the icky is going to come back at me over here. It comes back in all the areas of my life, right? There's no selective preference there. So non-reaction to the ego in others is one of the most effective ways, not only of going beyond ego in yourself, but also of dissolving the collective ego. And we're going to talk about the collective ego. So non-reaction to the ego in others. So recognizing the ego and disconnecting from it, not jumping in and making them wrong. But you can only be in a state of non-reaction if you recognize someone's behavior as coming from the ego, as being an expression of the collective human dysfunction. And man, do we have that. All you have to do is look at our political climate right now, and you can see how dysfunctional it is. Everybody's into blame, not everybody, that's a blanket statement. There is a lot of blame, I'm right, you're wrong, defensiveness, resentment towards other people's beliefs, frustration, we just had a conversation at breakfast this morning, and we said, wouldn't it be wonderful, because as the COVID experience starts to unravel, or is it, maybe it goes deeper into the rabbit hole, I don't know. What happens is we're starting to blame, and we're starting to see the repercussions of this, and we're starting to focus on the negative rather than all the positive that's come out of this in the media. Positive that's come out of our lives and not the media, but focusing on what the media is giving us. And, I said, wouldn't it be awesome for us to be able to have conversations about our different places of belief without making the other person wrong, but just being able to hear each other and knowing that you have an opinion and I have an opinion, you have a belief and I have a belief. Wouldn't it be cool if we could sit down in this neutrality with an empathetic ear and understand where the other person is coming from, but not get defensive and reactive? I mean, if we could do that, look at how much could be solved in this world. So this is really a collective human dysfunction. So all I can do is take care of myself, and all I can do is check myself and say, Eric, are you being empathetic of both sides of the coin? Are you being empathetic of somebody else's perspective, even if you don't agree with it? And when you realize it's not personal, there's no longer a compulsion to react as if it were. When you realize that it's not personal, see, what happens is it triggers in us a past experience where we experience some form of trauma, some form of dysfunction, some form of upset. That's what trauma is. And it triggers that. And then the ego takes over. Whereas if we can recognize, oh, something somebody's saying is triggering something in me, it's giving me an opportunity to heal something in me, I don't have to take this personal. I don't have to get involved, but instead I can say, thank you. You're giving me an opportunity to do some work on myself. So by not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring up the sanity in others. Because when we're in our ego, it's insanity, right? And we're so used to insanity around these parts that we don't even recognize that it's insanity, because it's just part of our normal everyday process. If you want to see insanity, just turn on the news and really just observe it. Don't get involved in what they're talking about, just observe it. And unconditioned consciousness, okay, where am I? By not reacting to the ego, you will often be able to bring out the sanity in others, which is the unconditioned consciousness as opposed to the conditioned. So, boundaries. At times, you may have to take practical steps to protect yourself from deeply unconscious people. For sure, that's a reality. And this you can do without making them into enemies. Your greatest protection, however, is being conscious. And so many people I see that truly have been victimized, but they come back at it with that victim standpoint. And what we want to avoid doing is going back in unconsciousness, but dealing with it in a conscious manner. Somebody becomes an enemy if you personalize the unconsciousness that is the ego, if you start to personalize it. So non-reaction is not weakness, but it's strength. So people say to me all the time, I teach balancing, I share with people how to go inside and feel physically what the body's doing. And once we feel where what the body's doing, like tight chest, or feel like we have a weight on our shoulder, or feel like our head is whirling, we go in and we identify that emotion or that sensation, and then we ask the body for what is the emotion behind that sensation. And every single time your body will give you an emotion. It's anxiety, it's fear, it's jealousy, it's anything like it's anger. And once we get that, then we can go and we can ask that when that emotion first presented itself that is actually being triggered by this current experience we're having. And then you go back to that story or that experience, and you don't get stuck in the story, because if you get stuck in the story, you'll drown there. But what you do is you go in and you get the limiting belief that version of yourself, when you were back at that age, whether it was last week or 25 years ago, you go back and you ask, what was the limiting belief at that time that I was currently holding? And the limiting belief, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, nobody cares about me, I'm not listening, or nobody's listening to me. There'll be negative belief statements. And then you go in, and once you balance that, then you can go have an intelligent conversation with the person that triggered you. So I know this in my own relationship. If Chuck and I are disagreeing on something, we have old yucky patterns like every other couple does. And you either go and pout and ignore each other, or you just sweep it under the carpet, or you maybe get into it and you argue about it. But the reality is if I engage like that, I'm unconscious, because I'm just stuck in my trigger and now I'm being defensive. But if I can have a conversation with Chuck and I recognize that I'm being triggered, and I just step out for a minute and I go and deal with that limiting belief that I think is really being triggered, I'm not good enough, and I recognize that it's really 12-year-old me arguing with him as opposed to 48-year-old me, then I can get some consciousness and wits about me, and I can go in and have an intelligent conversation. So that doesn't mean I'm tolerating bad behavior or I'm having to become passive. It means that I'm going in whole brain to the conversation with the person that I care about, right? It means I'm whole brain. We're not meant to be one-sided. In total reality, we're not supposed to be just a high D or just a high I or a high SC. We're supposed to be whole brained, which means we can access all of those personality traits. And the best way that I can do that is taking responsibility for my emotions and understanding when I'm triggered. So it's not about being passive, it's about being whole brained. And another word for non-reaction is forgiveness. Now, I have a personal challenge with forgiveness because I always say, who am I to forgive? I find that I'm in my ego when I'm talking about forgiveness. And so for me, forgiveness is more about, it's not about me forgiving somebody, it's about me getting the lesson out of the experience so that I can grow spiritually. And when I'm conscious, I'll go in to get the lesson. When I'm unconscious, I just make the person wrong and then I say, oh, well, I'll forgive you, right? And it's so great having little kids around because you can see this going down all the time. You can see the patterns being formed of the me, mine, and the, you know, I'm mad at her because she did this, and well, go forgive your brother. You know, like, what is that all about? What if we taught consciousness? To forgive is to overlook. This is Eckhart's definition. To forgive is to overlook. For me, forgiving is recognizing the pattern I play in it and the opportunity to learn something and spiritually grow. But for him, he says to forgive is to overlook, or rather to look through it. And I guess I'm saying that too, to look through to see the opportunity for you to grow spiritually. So you look through the ego to the sanity that is in every human being at his or her essence. To look through the ego to the sanity that is in every human being as his or her essence. That's like consciousness is our essence, sanity is our essence. But the ego loves to complain, and it loves to be resentful, and it loves to nag, and it loves to make it all about other people and other situations. And what you can do to a person, you can also do to a situation. Remember that. So if you're complaining about a person, you can also complain about a situation. And you make it into the enemy. And the implication is always this: this should not be happening. I don't want to be here. I don't deserve this. I don't want to be doing this. This isn't fair. You know, and this is the ego's greatest enemy of all, is of course the present moment, which is to say life itself. The ego does not like to be present. When you're present, the ego diminishes. So as long as you're saying this isn't fair and I don't like this and I don't deserve this, we're not stuck in the present moment, that's for sure, right? We're sliding around. So I have vote here. What does that mean? Complaining is not to be confused with informing someone of a mistake or note. It was note, not vote. Okay, I wanted to note this. Complaining is not to be confused with informing someone of a mistake or a deficiency so that it can be put right. So there's a big difference. And our ego will mix this one up for us. So to refrain from complaining doesn't necessarily mean putting up with bad quality or behavior. There's no ego in telling the waiter that your soup is cold. It just needs to be heated up. Stick to the facts. That's all we have to do, stick to the facts. That's nonviolent communication. If I stick to the facts when I'm expressing myself, then I don't get any drama dribbled in there, right? But when we start to say, oh, how dare that waiter serve me cold soup? I know they weren't even paying attention to me. They were over there chatting with another server. Right now we're stuck in the drama. Now we're in the blame game. Now we're in victim mode. I always say the best way to test out somebody's character or judge someone's character is go for dinner with them and see how they treat the wait staff. I was a server for a very long time, and right away you can see whether somebody's stuck in their ego or whether they're a quality person who's conscious of conscious. They're just conscious and awareness by how they treat the people when they're in a restaurant. So there is a me here that loves to feel personally offended by cold soup and is going to make the most of it. And, you know, there's people that I've gone to lunch with. I know they just want their money back. I know they want the lunch and they want the money, so they complain about it. And it's so funny because then they're coming from fear around money and they're stuck in their ego again. Or, you know, people just love to be offended, right? So and me too, all of this I'm guilty of, by the way. I'm just trying to be really conscious, just like you guys are by getting on this call. So The complaining we're talking about is in the service of the ego, not of change. So when it's in the service of change, it's healthy. When it's in the service of complaint, it is unhealthy. So know the difference. So I have here's the magic. If you can catch, that is to say, notice the voice in your head, perhaps in the very moment it complains about something, and recognize it for what it is. Oh, I'm complaining, I caught myself. The voice of the ego, no more than a conditioned mind pattern, a thought. If you can catch that, that's magical. You're winning. Just by own awareness, you're winning. You're on your route to living in your essence. So whenever you notice that voice, you will also realize that you're not the voice, but you are the one who is aware of the voice. You aren't the voice, that's ego, but you're the one who is aware of it because you are consciousness. You are not separate from consciousness. In fact, you are the awareness that is aware of the voice. And in the background, there is the awareness. So in the foreground, there is the voice and the thinker. We want the awareness. We want to be aware as much as possible of, it's almost like you're watching yourself as opposed to being in it, right? And you start to become free of the ego, free of the unobserved mind. The moment you become aware of the ego in you, it is strictly speaking no longer the ego, but just an old conditioned mind pattern. And man, we have several of these. Ego implies unawareness. So we jump down to reactivity and grievances. Okay, so this is another cool link. Resentment is often the emotion that goes with complaining. It may also be accompanied by a stronger emotion such as anger or some form of upset, right? How many times have you been resentful and angry or upset? And this becomes highly energetically charged. So what happens to that vibration? It just sinks to a low, low level. And complaining then turns into reactivity. And this is another way that the ego is going to the gym and strengthening itself. So there are many people who are always waiting for the next thing to react against. I see this so often. You know, I recognize this pattern in myself. I recognize this pattern in my mother, and that's probably where I got it from. As soon as she doesn't have something to worry about, she goes right to the next thing to worry about. And as soon as that thing is no longer a problem, she goes to the next thing. And I find that pattern in myself. And when I'm conscious of it, I can step back and say, I'm just going to let go of that. I'm going to let go of that fear. I'm going to let go of that worry. There's nothing to worry about. But our ego feeds on it, right? So when you're feeling annoyed, disturbed, it never takes long before the ego just becomes so absorbed in this process and it becomes outrage and how dare you? And I can't believe this is happening. And so many people that go from this to this to this, we're addicted. We're addicted to being upset. We're addicted to the anger, and it's a drug. It's like heroin, cocaine, sugar. It's right up there with addictions. And you know, we don't recognize it, but it's so demonstrative to families and to relationships. And the minute we start to see it, we can start to reset. A long-standing resentment is called a grievance. To carry a grievance is to be in a permanent state of against. That's rigidity, that's indifference, that's low vibration. Think about that. Where do you hold long-standing resentment in your life? Who do you hold long-standing resentment to? Sometimes it's with our parents, sometimes it's with siblings. It could be an old date or an old love. It could be to an experience way back when. You know, it was funny. I thought I let go of, I was in a 7-year relationship. I think I mentioned Corey on the last call. I was in a relationship with Corey, and we were better as friends as we were as partners living together. And I really thought, you know, after 4 years of being separated from him, I thought I was really free and clear from that whole experience, and I'd forgiven him in the traditional sense of forgiving him, and I'd moved on. I'd done all this work on myself. And it was interesting because I still had issues coming up in my health, and I went to see somebody about that, and what came up was that past relationship with him, and I was like, oh no, I've dealt with that. But I knew I hadn't, because as soon as that person had brought him up, I got a zing. And if you're still getting a physical sensation around somebody, it means that you haven't let go and you're still focusing on it. If you can't say somebody's name with neutrality or without feeling something shift in your body physically, you're still holding on to it in some capacity. And it's not necessarily conscious. It's probably happening at a subconscious level, because that's where we hold our patterning. And so we go in and we do the work and we feel the emotion and we identify the limiting belief, and then we can let go of it. So Collective grievances can survive for centuries in the psyche of a nation, a tribe. It can fuel a never-ending cycle of violence. And we see this. A grievance is a strong negative emotion connected to an event in the sometimes distant past that is being kept alive by compulsive thinking. Compulsive thinking, which is retelling the story in the head or out loud what someone did to you. So I used to complain about Corey when I was in a relationship with him to one of my best friends, Brooke. And she listened and she listened like any good friend would. And then one day she said, you know what, I'm not listening anymore. She said, Eric, if you continue to, and she goes, you're right, he's a jerk. But if I continue to listen to this, I'm just fueling it. So if you're going to want to continue about this, I'm just gonna have to step back. And I thought, profanity, who are you? You know, and I said, oh, really? Okay, whatever. And I collectively picked myself up and left the conversation and went home. And I remember being so offended. I wasn't offended. The essence of Erica, consciousness, the awareness was not offended. My lack of awareness, my unconsciousness, and my ego was just miffed. And what was interesting, it was from that point forward that I got conscious about my relationship. And that's when I decided to take a stand and set up some boundaries. And that's when I said, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me. And we really need to end this. And it was the beginning of my life into a place of awareness. It was the end of misery and pain. And it was really pivotal. So many years later, I sat with a whole bunch of First Nations chiefs in a sweat lodge, and we were all in a circle, and they were bringing the hot rocks in. They heat the rocks up for hours before you get to the sweat, and they bring these big rocks in, and they set them down in this little pit. And of course, you're in a tent, and you're very close to the fire. It's very, very hot. And they're bringing the grandfathers in, and this kid is telling his story. And all of a sudden, all of these people get up in this really close quarters, and they start turning their backs around, and they sit back down on their haunches, and now their backs are to the fire. So I'm like, okay, this is what they do in Rome. So I get up and I turn around, and I'm like, what's going on? Thinking in my mind. And the chief leans over and he says to me, 3 stories. We listen 3 times, and after 3 times, we don't listen anymore. Got that, kiddo? And I said, I got that. And I've taken that into my life with myself first. When I complain about something out loud more than 3 times, it means I'm unaware. And we do this with our surgeries, and we do this with our, you know, we just hold on to these stories and let them define us. If you don't want that situation anymore, quit talking about it. Talk about what you do want to create. And this brings us right out of the ego and into awareness. But we have this, we retell the stories, and it contaminates every area of your life when you stay stuck in a story, every single area. So while you think about and feel your grievance, it's negative emotional energy that distorts your perception of an event that is happening in the present, or influence in the way which you speak or behave towards someone in the present. So a strong grievance is enough to contaminate a very large area of your life and keep you in the grip of the ego. And how do I see this affect people? I see their health, and they don't know why they're sick. I see it in their financials, in their finances, and they don't understand why they're having a hard time financially. I see it in their relationships with people. They can't understand why they can't maintain connections with people, or while they're being duped. And the reason is because they're stuck in this giant grievance. So look for the zings. Be aware of the zings in your stories. It requires honesty, really, to be honest, to see whether you are still harboring grievances. And I had to get really honest with myself after Brooke said that. And I didn't initially. Initially, I reacted and I was caught up in ego. But when things got really quiet and I heard what she said, and I knew what the meaning of our relationship was to us, I mean, she was so dear, she is so dear and important to me, that I had to take a look at myself. What am I doing by perpetuating this story? I'm living in it, and I'm keeping it alive. And it was becoming my own enemy. So that awareness is pretty healthy. Feel the emotion that is the body's response to those thoughts. I can't iterate this enough. Keep checking in to see how your body feels. In fact, that's a great thing to do throughout the day. How am I feeling right now? Do I feel up? Do I feel joyful? Do I feel present? Do I feel love? Do I feel peace? Or, oh, do I feel some, and when you feel those ways, how will your body feel? It'll feel open and light. You won't feel you'll just feel the energy moving around in your body. And you have to get really quiet to listen to that and turn off the radios and the chitter chatter and all of that. But when you check in and you feel tightness in your chest, something's going on in your world. If you're feeling your guts twisted, something's going on. If your head, you can't keep it focused and you're just here, you're there, you're here, you're over there, you're up there, you're down there. It's not just because you're an I, it's because you're having a reaction physically to your reality. And when you're physically having a reaction, there's so much we can do about that by going in and addressing the body's physical sensations. So feel the emotion. That's the body's response to those thoughts. Don't try to let go of the grievance without doing that. Trying to let go to forgive does not work. Forgiveness happens naturally when you see that it has no purpose other than to strengthen a false sense of ego, to keep the ego in place. And that's why I say, go in and get the lesson. Go in and get the lesson. And then secretly, I always say, doesn't matter how much you've been victimized, thank that other spiritual being, because everybody's a spiritual being on this planet. Thank that spiritual being in your mind for this opportunity for you to grow. I see it this way. We're dancing with everybody. Everybody we're in a relationship, we're having a dance with. And every single dance has an opportunity for us to learn something. So check in and really try to have the awareness to see what that opportunity and that lesson is. The past has no power to stop you from being present now. Only your grievance about the past can do that. And what is a grievance? The baggage of old thought and emotion. And don't kid yourself, we're all holding on to it. So get really honest about that. And that might be your intention for the day. You might get up and say, you know, today I plant the seed of intention that I can be really honest with myself. I can be really honest about my stories, you know. So it's a really nice summary there. Okay, bottom of 66, this is our child, this is me, being right or making wrong. So complaining as well as fault finding and reactivity strengthen the ego's sense of boundary and separateness on which its survival depends. It depends on this. It feeds it, but it also strengthens the ego in another way by giving it a feeling of superiority on which it thrives. So it may not be immediately apparent how complaining, say about a traffic jam or politicians or about the greedy or about COVID situation, or your colleagues or your partner or men and women or your children, it gives you a sense of superiority. And here's why. When you complain, by implication, you are right. And the person or situation you complain about or react against is wrong. And this is a lot of our shticks, right? To make somebody else wrong so you can be right, so you can feed your ego. Totally done unconsciously. None of this is conscious, remember? So you're not a bad person. It's just we're not awake. We're asleep at the wheel. There's nothing that strengthens the ego more than being right. Think about who in your life you have to be right with. Think about this. Being right is identification with a mental position, a perspective, an opinion, a judgment, a story. And for you to be right, of course, somebody else has got to be wrong. And so the ego loves to make wrong in order to be right. And you need to make others wrong in order to get a stronger sense of who you are, because we identify with that superiority that leads us to feel, that leaves us feeling, which is a false sense of self. Not only a person, but also a situation can be made wrong through complaining and reactivity, which always implies that this should not be happening. Whenever you're saying this should not be happening, wake up, wake up, wake up. You're in denial. It's happening because it's supposed to be happening because there's an opportunity for you to grow. So in defense of an illusion, if it's, I say, let's not be ridiculous here. So facts undoubtedly exist. For sure, there's facts. If you say light travels faster than sound and someone else says that the opposite is the case, you're obviously right and he is wrong, because the facts are that light, as we know it, travels faster than sound. But this simple observation that lightning precedes thunder could confirm this. So not only are you right, but you know you are right. Is there any ego involved in this? Possibly. You got to check yourself, but not necessarily. If you are simply stating that you know this to be true, there's no ego involved in that, because there's no identification. Identification with what? With mind and a mental position. Such identification, however, can easily start to creep in if you find yourself saying, believe me, I know. Why do you never believe me? What, you don't trust me? You don't think I know about this? Then the ego's already crept in and it's hiding in a little word, me. Look for the me's. Look for the me's in the conversation. That was your homework a while back. So a simple statement, light is faster than sound, simple statement, although true, is now the service of an illusion. of the ego, and it's become contaminated with the false sense of I, and it's become personalized. I see this all the time when we're talking about COVID. I heard, and I think, and this is what, right? We just, you just in giving the facts and correcting people on the facts, and there's a lot of ego dribbled into that. We got to be aware of that. And so the I feels diminished or offended because somebody doesn't believe what I said. So what's getting triggered? The little kid in me that got overlooked, the little kid in me that nobody paid attention to, the little kid in me when I asked for somebody and nobody responded the way I needed them to respond in that moment gets triggered, and now I get defensive. So are you defending the truth? No, not the truth. In any case, needs no defense. Truth doesn't need defense. But the light or sound does not care about what anybody else thinks. The facts don't care about what other people think. You do, and that's a mind-made substitute. So it's even more accurate to say the illusion is defending itself. Even the simple and straightforward realm of facts can lend itself to egoic distortion and illusion, and we see this all the time. How much more so the less tangible realm of opinions, viewpoints, and judgments? Do you have the need to be right? Do you have the need to be first? Do you have the need to make sure everybody's heard that it came from you, right? That's the ego. Every ego confuses opinions and viewpoints with facts. And that's what I love about nonviolent communication. 4 easy steps. Here's nonviolent communication steps. These are the facts. This is how I feel. This is what I want. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? So the facts are, let's see some facts. You dropped your socks 2 feet from the laundry hamper. Your socks are outside of the laundry hamper. I am hopeful and frustrated at the same time. What I want is for us to just clean as we go. Are you open to the possibility of helping me do this? Which is much different than, would you quit leaving your stupid socks on the floor? You just throw them everywhere like you don't care. Like, what do you think I'm doing all day? I'm working and trying to keep this house clean, and right, it turns into that, as opposed to the facts. The facts are, the socks are outside the laundry hamper. The truth is, I am frustrated and hopeful, or else I wouldn't be having this conversation. What I want is for us to do this together. Are you open to the possibility of joining me in this attempt to clean as we go? Totally different way of asking, non-violent communication, and it applies to everything from firing someone in your brokerage to getting rid of a client that's obnoxious and is just not, you're not tuning into, or talking to your children, right? So this way we quit to confuse the ego in opinions and viewpoints. I have here, what's for dinner? Chuck would come home and he would say, because I've worked from home for 18 years coaching, and Chuck would always come in from Ledcor and he would say to me, just very innocently, naively, he would say, Erin, what's for dinner? And I'd say, my head would spin around, and inside I'd just get instantly triggered and tied up into knots. I'd say, what do you mean, what's for dinner? What do you mean? Like, what do you think I've been doing all day? And I would get super defensive and justifying what I did. Because I work from home, I obviously was carrying around that I had to justify, how I handled my workload, and how I handle my clientele was so differently than him getting dressed, driving an hour, punching a time clock, going to work for sometimes 16 hours at a time, coming home. I was trying to justify that I was working as hard as him. And it all came up with when he would say, what's for dinner? And of course, I don't do that anymore. Sometimes I get a tinge when he says, what's for dinner? But he cooks as much as me now. And I recognize that that's my own insecurities. That's my ego getting involved. And what a terrible thing to get in between me and my love. What a terrible thing to get in between me and the person that I want to share my life with. It erodes relationships. Just be aware of this, you guys. So truth, relative or absolute? So he gets into this. Beyond the realm of simple and verifiable facts, the certainty that I'm right and you're wrong is a very dangerous thing in personal relationships, as I just said, as well as in interactions between nations, tribes, religions, and so on. It's war. So he goes into I'm right, you are wrong belief and how it affects us collectively. And he reminds you here that, I'm right, you are wrong is one of the ways in which the ego strengthens itself. It's making yourself right and others wrong. It's a mental dysfunction that perpetuates separation and the conflict between human beings. We're not separate. We're part of consciousness. Did you get that memo today? We're part of consciousness. And so when we understand that we're part of consciousness it means that the conflict between human beings, when we're forgetting that we're consciousness, we are stuck in this battle between what is right and what is wrong, and now we're never going to have peace. We're never going to have peace as long as we're doing that. And wouldn't that be the moral relativism that some contemporary Christian teachings see as a great evil of our times, right? And the history of Christianity is, of course, a prime example of how the belief that you are in sole possession of the truth, that is to say right, can corrupt your actions and behavior to the point of insanity. And for centuries, torturing and killing people, and just for people's opinions and their beliefs, you know, how little do we value human life that we will take somebody's life because their belief is different than ours? It's total insanity. It's total insanity. Yet there's a certain immunity to it as well. And so 1 million people that the mad dictator Pol Pot, he uses this as an example in Cambodia, ordered to kill everybody who was wearing glasses because they represented the bourgeoisie, right? They represented the exploiters of the peasants, and they were the educated class because they wore these, right? Think about that. 1 million people murdered because of the assumption that their beliefs were different. And even if their beliefs were different, you know, what is wrong with us? And this perpetuates today in the 21st century. So the Catholic and other churches are actually very correct when they identify relativism. And this is the belief that there is no absolute truth to guide human behavior as one of the evils of our times. But you won't find absolute truth if you look for it where it cannot be found in doctrines, ideologies, sets of rules, or stories. Just underline that. Doctrines, ideologies, sets of rules, or stories. That's not the truth. That's our interpretation of the truth. And it's too bad, because we've had all these incredible leaders in spirituality that have come before us, huge signposts for us, that we take their words and we put our ideologies and we put our stories and our doctrines on top of them and twist them, and we lose the essence of that conscious awareness that they were alerting us of. So all religions are equally false and equally true, depending on how you use them and interpret them. You can use them in the service of the ego, we see that, or you can use them in the service of truth. And if you believe only your religion is truth, you're using it in the service of ego. So what I loved about my father is he could go into any house of worship. He would always talk about this, and he would feel at peace. And I work with people of all faith, and I understand the essence of it. And that is a gift. And used in such a way, when religion can be viewed that way, we all come together and we heal. So religious teachings represent signposts or maps left behind by awakened humans. So here, I love this. There's only one absolute truth, and all other truths emanate from it. When you find that truth, your actions will be in alignment with it. Human action can reflect the truth, or it can reflect illusion. Can the truth be put into words? Yes. But the words are, of course, not it. They're not the truth. They only point to it. So the truth is inseparable from who you are, because you are the truth. I've got 2 minutes left. You are the truth. You are the truth. Your essence is the truth, not your ego, not when you're battling for some opinion, but when you're in your essence. The very being that you are is truth. Jesus tried to convey that when he said, I am the way and the truth and the life. But again, this has been so misconstrued over time. I am the way and the truth and the life. He was speaking about us and our truth and our life and our consciousness, but very misinterpreted often, and it becomes a great obstacle. Christian mystics have called it the Christ within, Buddhists call it Buddha nature, Hindus call it Atman, and indwelling God. When you're in touch with these dimensions within yourself, and being in touch with it is your natural state, not some miraculous achievement. Know that. You don't have to like pray for a miracle here. It's your natural state. It's who we are. And all your actions and relationships will reflect the oneness with all the life and sense deep within. This is love. This is love. And what a great place to end on page 72. The clouds don't need to part for this to happen. So this is such a great opportunity. We're going to continue the complaining challenge into this week, and we're going to just keep our eyes out for the resentment and for the making right and the making wrong. I just quickly going to share this with you. As I was setting up for this morning and I was going through my notes, my sister texted me that just a document, and I texted her back a document about my mom's seniors living facility, how they're not opening up still because of COVID, even though they're lightening some of the rollouts here. And so she texted me back something indifferently, And I texted her back, what are you talking about? Are we on the same page? And she said, Erica, you're a big girl, figure it out. And my sister's a high DS personality. And I said to her, gee, like, come on, don't text me, call me on the phone because you're just being rude. And then I started giggling because here I'd already slipped into my ego while I was preparing an ego session. And I could feel it in my body. I wanted to pick her up and call her. Then I'm like, I'm just going to go run this past Chuck. And I look out and Chuck's meditating on the sun deck with his sunglasses on. I'm like, well, I can't interrupt him. And they're like, what are you doing? You're having a reaction. You're trying to prove that she's wrong and you were right and she's being rude and you were right. And we just slip into it because it's our subconscious programming. So be patient with yourselves, and you can step back and do redos, timeouts and redos whenever you need to do this, but just an awareness about it is really quite lovely. And I want to, again, thank you for being on this journey with us. And I'd love to hear your feedback or your questions or your examples that you learned throughout the week. All you have to do is text me or post up on the questions board here. I look forward to the opportunity of meeting again with you next week. Have a really wonderful weekend, you guys. Thank you.